Okay, so I'm going to start. So it's really lovely, well, not to see you, but my name's Joanne Bretherton, but everyone calls me Goody. I'm the Chief Exec of Standing Together, but also one of the co-founders of the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance, which is what we're here today to talk about. In front of you, you've got the agenda, so what to expect from the day. Just a little bit of housekeeping as well before I do a bit of an intro. This event is being recorded, so for those people that weren't able to join, we'll be sending it out at the end and there'll be links onto our website. For those of you that are keen at tweeting, like I am, we've got a hashtag for the event, which is DAHA Evaluation, and obviously our Twitter handle, so please tag us into that. Also, we have got the chat function is open, which is great. We would just ask you to be really kind and respectful on the chat function. There's also the Q&A, so you'll see we've got a large amount of time for a panel with just an expert panel of people starting from 1:20 so please do drop your questions into that and we will try and answer as many as possible in the time frame that we have. And that's all of the kind of housekeeping bits and pieces. In terms of the background of DAHA, it's a really amazing privilege really to be here. It was launched as a partnership in 2014 between Standing Together, Gen 2 and Peabody. At that time, it was myself, Nicole Jacobs, Kelly Henderson and Megan Field who brought DAHA together, and I just wanted to give a huge shout out to them in the introduction. Today we're here to learn obviously a finding from an external evaluation from York University, and also for those of you that aren't familiar with DAHA, basically we are our whole mission is to improve the whole housing sector response to domestic abuse, and we started with basically creating an accreditation process for housing providers, that's local authorities and housing providers nationally, in order to be a benchmark about how to improve your response to domestic abuse. So far we've got 27 accredited and over 156 on the journey for DAHA accreditation, which is just incredible because it covers millions and millions of households across England. And we're also really grateful for our funded posts. You'll see our panellists later, but London councils and also Comic Relief for their support with all of this work. So I wanted to make sure that I included that too. So that's obviously all I have to say, I believe. I'll be chairing the event throughout and I'll also be part of the panel. I've just seen Nicole Jacobs has joined us, so hi Nicole. We're going to have, it's lovely to see you, we're going to have Nicholas and Joanne Bretherton from York University presenting first. So me and Nicole will be turning off our videos and letting them crack on with that. And Joanne and Nicholas, I guess. There she is. Hi Joanne, it's lovely to see you. Welcome. I'm just going to mute myself and put my video off, and then I know you're going to hand over to Nicholas. Thank you so much for taking the time and rearranging your teaching diary to be with us today. We really, really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks, Goody. Thank you for that introduction. I will get up my PowerPoint. Okay, so I think I can speak for both Nicholas and I when I say that, well, one, it's fantastic to be part of this today, and it's nice to have gone through this journey with DAHA and Standing Together, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work with both organisations on this really important piece of work. I think today I have very little time, unfortunately, to go through the findings with you. I think I've got about 8 minutes or so, but I will go through a series of slides with you that really pick out the headline findings, I guess. And then I'll hand over to Nicholas to talk about the cost benefit analysis. So just to say, actually, these are interim findings, and the next stage of the research is due to begin very soon, with a final report completed late spring, early summer. Okay, so if we start with giving you some context. So some of these statistics I'm sure that many of you are already aware of. So the ONS reported that in England and Wales, towards the end of March 19, estimated 1.6 million women and 786,000 men experienced domestic abuse. For the year ending March 20, 80% of that domestic abuse occurred in or around the home. And as we know, significant numbers of domestic abuse related crimes recorded by the police are where the victim was female. The links between women's homelessness and domestic abuse have now been long established, work that myself and colleagues of mine have done, and also other academics have done. We know that domestic violence is a key cause of homelessness for women, and access to a safe home is a key priority for survivors of domestic abuse, and it does factor strongly into that decision around whether to stay or leave an abusive relationship. So most responses to domestic violence and abuse have centred on crisis intervention and this firefighting model, so police intervention and refuge. There is clear evidence for early intervention, so delivering effective prevention where possible. So stopping the loss of a woman's home due to domestic abuse through prevention should be part of an integrated strategy, so that this can help minimise both human and financial costs of homelessness that's linked to domestic abuse. So of course we know that the cost of domestic violence and abuse are primarily human, but with effective strategies, we can also incur a financial benefit in terms of using preventative services. So what could the role of DAHA accreditation be? So we know that DAHA accreditation is designed to detect and respond to domestic abuse more effectively, and to provide those early warnings where possible. And this has created the scope for new and potentially more effective responses to domestic violence and abuse. DAHA accreditation could help reduce the risk to well-being and life chances that might otherwise arise if someone has to flee and leave their home and community. Now, very importantly, and certainly here today, housing providers themselves can play a significant and critical role here in establishing active interventions in cases of suspected abuse, and also providing the much needed support to survivors. So the research, so we did an independent evaluation of domestic abuse housing alliance accreditation. Nicholas and I from the Centre for Housing Policy at York, as Goody said, the research drew on qualitative and quantitative data using 2 case study areas, London and the North East, and we worked with 2 major housing providers in those areas, which were Gen2 and Guinness Partnership. These interim findings are based on 17 one-to-one in-depth interviews with survivors. Now, this is very good because we know that it's very difficult to get survivors to talk to people, and for reasons that we all completely understand. So we were very, very pleased that people were willing to come forward and talk to us. We also did a survivor focus group and 10 one-to-one in-depth interviews with a range of staff, from CEOs to caseworkers to data analysts, and heads of domestic abuse services from across both sites. We also spoke to 3 senior members of DAHA, current and past. DAHA were also asked to collect some additional data for us, and this was for the cost benefit analysis that Nicholas will talk about a little bit later. So interim findings. For me, the biggest finding is looking at the impact on survivors, and initial contact with housing providers varied considerably. So it was often the police or an external domestic violence organisation that had notified the housing provider on behalf of the resident. And from our sample of survivors, only a few reported their experiences directly. So we can see that there was a lack of self-referral. Now, I'll come back to this a little bit later, because I do believe that there are reasons for this. Accessing support was easier than survivors would have expected. Interviewees felt that things progressed incredibly quickly once they had notified that something was going on. And the non-judgmental and approachable attitude of staff really helped this process, and it helped survivors to open up and be able to talk about what was going on. Survivors were offered a range of support measures. Now, this of course was in accordance with what they were experiencing and what they were at risk of, and this ranged from the obvious sort of immediate safety and security measures to helping with aspects of the criminal justice system. Some survivors did say that they felt that they could ask for anything, and this gave a real sense of reassurance. And again, this comes back to the positive relationship that they had with the caseworker at the housing provider. And the quote, I think, encapsulates that perfectly. Okay, so we know that suffering from abuse can increase feelings of loneliness and isolation. And often we heard that simply having someone there to talk to was the greatest form of support. Again, as the quote illustrates. I think every survivor that I spoke to talked about an increase in confidence. Once they'd asked for and received support and they'd opened up, it was the increase in confidence that was the most noticeable change in their lives. But we did have an issue with some survivors not being aware of the support that was available. Now, this goes back to what I was talking about in terms of the lack of self-referrals. I think there was still an assumption that housing providers would not be the organisation to go to in terms of matters of domestic violence and abuse. And I think that's something that the providers need to be cognizant of. So several of the women stated that without this support, they could not imagine where they would currently be. And I think that basically says it all, really. And I think, again, that the quote illustrates that quite clearly, in a very dark place. And then the support received from the housing provider changed everything for them. Okay, so if we look at the experience of DAHA accreditation for the housing provider, so of course there were two different aspects to the research. There was the impact on survivors, and then of course the very important aspect is looking at how this was for the housing providers themselves. So for many providers, the desire to offer assistance around domestic abuse is there, but the problem is they kind of don't know where to start and where to begin implementation, and indeed how. Sometimes motivation in undertaking accreditation was financial. The quote here again shows this quite clearly. So when we're looking at households that are seemingly problematic, this will take up much time for frontline housing officers. Sometimes it's around social responsibility and wanting to provide that better service, as in the next quote. The process of accreditation overall was found by both housing providers to be relatively straightforward and a little eye-opening. I think they did find it an opportunity to acquire more skills, and I think there is often an assumption that you know, we know enough about domestic abuse and we know how to proceed, but I think the accreditation process really opened people's eyes in terms of actually the extent and the lengths that they could go to, and the things that they needed to learn. The assistance and support offered during the accreditation process was said to be very comprehensive, and DAHA were incredibly helpful throughout. The support offered to residents post-accreditation was felt to be much more extensive, with more measures in place to assist survivors. So it was felt that once accreditation was there, they knew how to respond much more effectively, and there were greater measures there to help residents. So the organisational impact overall for the providers, obviously learning new strategies to detect and combat abuse, a sharpening up of policies. So of course, sometimes policies, domestic abuse and violence policies are in place, but they need sharpening up. You know, they need to be more effective and more systematic. And the support available was said to now be more systematic and certainly more coherent. So finally, what this did, this gave increased confidence in making those assessments in cases of abuse, and that enabled inevitably to formulate an inappropriate response. And this was mentioned by several of the staff members. And the quote at the end highlights that quite clearly. Okay, so I'll pass over to my colleague Nicholas now, and he will go over the cost benefit analysis. So Nicholas, if you could just switch your camera on.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to quickly share my screen as well. So I'm going to go quite fast because I'm bit conscious of time, and it's just really some really core messages that I want to quickly get across in terms of what we found so far. As Joe says, that these are interim findings, so there's more work to do, and there's probably more work to do around the cost side of things than there is around some of the other material that we've gathered. So we have three sets of costs really related to domestic abuse. There's the cost to the housing providers, there's cost to local authorities, particularly around their homelessness functions, and then there's the kind of wider cost to society. The cost to housing providers you'll probably be all very familiar with, but it's things like rent arrears, sometimes where housing management functions react to what's actually domestic abuse, but which appears to be or is reported as nuisance on the surface. And sometimes that in the past has resulted in eviction. So issues around rent arrears, nuisance, property damage, and again, where the underlying issue has actually been domestic abuse. And if the domestic abuse had been more quickly and more effectively addressed, then these costs might not have arisen. So these costs are from Gen 2. Other people like Shelter have done some estimated costs as well. Very, very quickly, I mean, the cost varies between each time it happens, but you're looking at least sort of £6,000–7,000 each time an eviction happens for a housing provider. So obviously avoiding that cost, particularly if you're avoiding several evictions a year, there's a significant potential saving there. Then there's the cost to local authorities. So it's into 25,000 plus people a year or households a year where domestic abuse is flagged by the statutory system as being the cause of homelessness. Other research that I and others have been involved with suggests that actually experience of domestic abuse is more widespread than that. But this is where the administrative systems flagged that this has been an issue. In 2016, some work we did with Crisis estimated that annual service costs for somebody experiencing homelessness are around 14,000 a year. That's about 16,000 in today's prices, just over that. Costs around support within supported housing. Those of you who may be from London authorities will recognise the scale of the bill for temporary accommodation, the bulk of which is for London, but in 2017, the National Audit Office worked out that it's around 845 million was spent on temporary accommodation. That's disproportionately lone parent families for whom domestic abuse is a major cause of their homelessness. And there's obviously potential for significant savings around those costs if we can get into a position through DAHA accreditation where those numbers can be brought down through homelessness prevention. And then finally, there's the societal costs. Other people have looked in this in detail. Here's one source produced by the Home Office in 2019, which is estimates for 2016, 2017. The costs in financial terms, I mean, the main cost is obviously the human cost, but the cost in financial terms is gigantic to UK society. So anything that brings down the social, the economic costs alongside all the human costs, all the trauma costs, is obviously something that could be beneficial across public expenditure as a whole, whether it's NHS, criminal justice, or all these other services. So the interim report contains what we call at the minute some broad estimates, and the final stage of the research will have more detailed costs, so we can say something a bit more detailed about what the cost benefits are. One thing that's come out is that accreditation costs vary somewhat in terms of how things are implemented. But what we can say at this stage of the research is that all the indications so far are that DAHA accreditation will more than pay for itself. For housing providers in terms of housing management and prevention problems being circumvented and prevention of eviction. For local authorities with a housing duty, homelessness duty, for reducing the direct costs around homelessness. And then there are these much wider societal benefits, which include things like the NHS costs, social care, social work services costs, and costs around the criminal justice system. And that's just a very quick tour, and I'll stop sharing now. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Joe and Nicholas, for being with us today. Really, really appreciate it to hear it straight from you. We're really looking forward to getting the final evaluation. Obviously, this is just the interim. There's lots of people asking about the slides and stuff, and we'll make sure that we ask those questions. And it's lovely to see everyone in the chat and so many people that I actually recognise. So big shout out to all of you as well. We now have the real privilege of basically welcoming a real supporter of ours, but an amazing individual. Is she actually, is she on here? Zara, are you there? Yeah, there you are. You're on mute.
Hello.
So, hi, it's just so lovely to see you. And I think we were saying yesterday, right, that we were both as nervous as each other. But welcome and thank you so much for coming and speaking to the audience. We've got, I won't say how many people we've got so far. We've obviously got the open chat box and stuff like that, but we really just appreciate you coming to today and talking to us about your experience, but also your background in housing and what that means. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, and we're all rooting for you, okay?
Thank you for having me, thank you. So, hello everyone. I am Lee. I'm not a public speaker. I am a survivor of domestic abuse. And I am a survivor who just so happens to have a couple of decades of experience working within a housing association. What I am is 100% committed to supporting anyone who does not tolerate domestic abuse. One of the most important things that anyone will ever need in their life is a safe place to live. And my home was not safe. So today, I am really hoping that everyone on here all wants to work together to reach the same goal, because our housing providers are perfectly placed to spot signs and reach out to victims. And that is why, when I first heard about DAHA's work and the accreditation, I had a smile from ear to ear, because when I think back to when I was experiencing domestic abuse, if the housing association that I had worked for had achieved DAHA accreditation, wow, this would have made a huge difference to my life and to my safety, my finances, my security, and certainly my mental health. So surely, if all housing providers have that same set of standards and an accreditation process, we couldn't fail to improve the housing sector's response to domestic abuse. The beneficial impact on survivors of domestic abuse, as well as on organisations and their staff, would be immense. If only others had believed me, and for my voice to have been heard, because I could have helped save so many tenants, maybe even staff who were experiencing domestic abuse, because those victims were being abused behind their own closed doors, our properties. What goes on in that home when domestic abuse greets you at your door is sometimes so cruel, it is impossible to put it into words. No one deserves to be abused. Sadly, I know how such vile, evil abuse made me ill, and I lost everything. I was imprisoned. My abuser had put a tracker on my car, and I found one on my phone. I could not go anywhere or do anything without him knowing about it. I worked, and there were so many mornings where my keys were missing, where he had hidden them. He made calls to my work telling me of how he couldn't get into our front door, hoping that I would leave work and come home. See, he would do these things to try and abuse me even more. I sadly have a million examples. And some of those examples of how some use every moment to continue abusing you. But do you know what? Even in those times of deep, dark despair, I still had a passion burning inside of me to make sure no one else ever felt like I did. That passion and my 3 children saved me. So my fight to raise awareness, to educate and support others started in 2014. And that is when I started to shush no more. In my home, I was forbid to speak for weeks on end. And at that time, I could not speak out about my endurances in fear of reprimand. But I really do look back with pride at how I still worked so hard until I had a breakdown. Looking back, my fear and the pain that was on my face was so apparent that no one ever asked me if I was okay. That really, are you okay? So I asked for everyone to notice, to check in on your colleagues, and of course do the same with your tenants. Domestic abuse is being talked about, but domestic abuse is shockingly rife. And I am having to repeat that daily, as it really is that bad and worse. Abusers are not clever. They are damn right cruel. And I will fight to help others to create safe homes. And I also hope to eventually see communities where perpetrators are held accountable for their behaviour. Firsthand, I can tell you is how just knowing that there is someone that you can talk to and somewhere you feel safe, it gives victims an inner strength to fight and to live abuse-free. And when they can, and when they are ready, they will know that they can reach out to their housing provider, and the staff will have an understanding of what goes on in their home. They will know what to say and where to signpost tenants for support and safety. So please, when you are setting up your DAHA steering groups, collaboration is key. We need to focus on understanding what support, advice and services victims of domestic abuse need, and what they need so they can be safe and able to live in your homes abuse-free. So choose that group of staff carefully, those right people, staff who can naturally interact with others, because it is so important that every person involved can embrace their emotions and feelings, because helping others, saving lives, needs us all to work together as equals. Please, I ask for egos to be put to one side. Put those textbooks down for a moment and agree to take criticism on the chin. There is no room for judgment, stigma, or ignorance, nor for anyone to refuse to acknowledge that they may need domestic abuse training, and quash any badges of honours, as this is about people's lives. It's not a project, please, where you seek a promotion. See, I have that understanding as an insider and a survivor, and that is why today I've spoken out. Everyone has a value. Invest in that value. Listen to our survivor stories. Some can help you. They know solutions. And if endurances do not have an impact on you and do not make you want to fight to make these life-saving changes, then please search for your heart and soul And thank you very much for listening to me today. Thank you.
Sarah, please stay right there, Sarah.
Oh,
Honestly, I'm a bit speechless. You'll see from the chat how that resonated with people, and I'm almost on the verge of tears that Judith's turned her camera on just to give you kisses as well. I don't know how anyone's going to really follow that, to be honest. And you're just incredible. Like you can see, I'm stumbling over my words because I just don't know what to say. But I just wish, you know, I can see from the chat that what you've said, there's somebody there that's like, you know, I've not heard about this, and that you've literally given them the determination and strength to take it back to their organisation and do more. And that's all you can hope for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've got both hats on, you know, I've got experiences of both sides. You know, I mean, no malice. I just would love to see a world where we all work together, and of course where domestic abuse is eradicated. But meanwhile, you know, we can make some really great changes. So thank you for your time and listening.
Thank you for coming. I wish we were actually all together in a room so I could give you a big hug.
Thank
you so much, and we'll see you. Bye.
Bye.
Right, so moving from that, I'm loving all of the messages that are coming through the chat. They're literally making my heart burst. We've now got Nicole Jacobs, who is the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, and also, for those that don't know, is one of the other co-founders of the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance, where she was previously the CEO of Standing Together. So, Nicole, lovely to see you, and I will hand over to you.
Oh, thank you, Goody, and thank you, Zara. I agree with Goody. That was amazing. It was good to hear you talk about your journey and how inspirational you are to all of us about the kinds of things we could all be doing. And so I wanted to just say a few words about to the team directly at DAHA. I have to do that first, and to Giddy. But then I'd like to tell you just for a few minutes a little bit about some opportunities we all have in front of us in terms of the domestic abuse bill, and a bit of what you can expect from my office, so that you, if you haven't heard about what we've been doing or about this new commissioner's office, what we're up to. That's, if I could achieve that in 10 minutes, I'll be doing well. So I would love for Goody at some point today to talk a little bit to everyone who's on the call to understand kind of her journey in helping to create DAHA. I don't know, from my personal point of view, I don't know where we'd be without Goody, and bringing all of this incredible work that she built up over years at Peabody, and joining the partnership with Gen 2 and Kelly Henderson and Standing Together when I was there, to create this wonderful team of partners in DAHA. And I guess, you know, in so many ways we think there's so much change to do. There's so much that we all would like to see happening that's not happening. But I think anytime you are feeling low about it, I think you should reflect on this DAHA partnership and think about years ago when everyone would have said, there's so much of a role for housing. What can we do? And really kind of very much just on the basis of kind of passion and all of the things Zara just encouraged us to think about and do. These groups came together to say, let's join efforts and really transform this response to domestic abuse within housing providers. And let's draw on the good work that's already out there and really acknowledge and really build a partnership about that. And it's completely changing the landscape, as we can see in this interim evaluation, as I know from being involved myself in being in and out of housing providers who had really, really valued the DAHA accreditation, had really felt day to day the difference it was making. And I just think that's really inspirational to think, yes, you can. This is a great example of how you can change things and really build what I tend to term, and I know Standing Together uses the term, the coordinated community response. to domestic abuse, because that is absolutely what it takes to address an issue like domestic abuse. Every service, everyone doing what they need to be doing and working together. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Joe and Nicholas and your expert team at York, but also very importantly to the DAHA team sitting behind the scenes, because I've seen you work up close. I know how passionate you are. You're a dream team, and I miss you very much, but I hear very often about you in my new role as the Domestic Abuse Commissioner. And so I just wanted to acknowledge all of your work in bringing about today. One of the things I want you all to know is that we have the domestic abuse bill at this stage of committee stage in the House of Lords, which means on your to-do list this week, if you want to do something really proactive, I would really encourage you, if you haven't already done it, to just take a moment and write to your MP, write to anyone who you have a connection with, potentially in the House of Lords, but particularly your MPs, because this bill will be going back to the House of Commons after the Lords Committee stage. There are currently 200 amendments tabled to the domestic abuse bill. So a huge amount of attention being given now about how to make this bill even better. And there are amendments in relation to provision of service for migrant survivors of domestic abuse, which currently are left out of the bill. And it's really important that MPs hear from all of us to know how much we feel that issue is important. There's issues in relation to tenancies, and I would hope someone from the DAHA team might be able to put into the chat a bit of information about the proposed amendments in relation to tenancies and ability to remove without so much cost and so much disruption when perpetrators of domestic abuse need to be removed from tenancies. And there's a lot of detail to that, so I'll leave that to some briefing documents, but that's a huge amendment that's not getting as much attention and really could use your support. And of course, there are amendments about the provision of community-based services, which are really suffering right now and under huge amounts of pressure and are not sustainably funded. So those domestic abuse services that DAHA accreditation requires you to work so closely with, those services really need to be included in the statutory provision of the bill. So thank you. If you consider doing that, I just want to thank you. I've said this for a long time, but this is truly the final window to really influence this bill. And so I'd encourage you to do that. Part of what the bill does is it establishes my office. So I've been appointed as a designate about a year ago. And in the bill, it creates a statutory underpinning for the Domestic Abuse Commissioner's Office for England and Wales. And in the bill, it gives my office a couple of powers which are relevant to this discussion today. One is about a power for public bodies to cooperate with my office when seeking information. And another is an ability to make reports with recommendations to public bodies that have to be responded to within 56 days. That's not all of what our office would do, but it gives a couple of powers that we don't currently have. And I would intend, the kind of background that I've already told you about, an interest that I told you about, I really want to use and work alongside you and the DAHA team to do as much as we possibly can to create that whole housing approach to domestic abuse. So that's with government at the national and local levels, and using the powers of the office to kind of get at the information that we need to have more quickly and to make more firm recommendations and really try as much as we can to really do our part at the DA Commissioner's Office to really make sure that we're getting to where we need to be as quickly as we need to be in terms of that whole housing approach. So I just want to leave you with that and make sure that you're aware, if you're not already, of our office and what we're doing. We're doing an awful lot of mapping. We do a good bit of policy work. We don't commission services, even though we're called the DA Commissioner's Office. we're very much about bringing the information together, advising government, but also holding government to account and doing as much as we can to create that momentum and change in this area. My last comment will be just to encourage each and every one of you to, as Zara said, do play your part, whether that's individually helping a friend, family, neighbor, whether you're a funder of this initiative, you know, really appreciating that this needs continued funding to really get us, you know, the momentum for this accreditation and the wider whole housing work in much more common practice. We're getting there, and the team has done a lot to bring it this far, but this is a huge shift in a huge change, and it needs our support and our funding. And obviously, if you are undertaking DAHA accreditation, if you're considering it, doing all that you can to really make that happen. And I know you're here today to hear about the evaluation and the interim findings to help make that case. So thank you for all that you're doing, and please continue to do it. And I will pass back over to Giddy and the team for your Q&A. But thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I'm absolutely thrilled to see it all happening, and I couldn't be any more supportive to all of you for the work that you're doing to really push and make sure that all housing providers get the DAHA accreditation and really engage in the whole housing approach to domestic abuse. So thank you so much, Giddy. Back to you.
Thanks, Carl. That was really great, and it's great to hear about the work that you're doing, and also just thanks for all the support in terms of, and also contextualising DAHA as part of the whole housing approach, in terms of all the different options that, or remedies that are in place in terms of housing. So for those that are on the call, there's now 210 of you but haven't seen the whole housing toolkit. It is on our website, so we'll make sure that we share the links, because that talks about perpetrator management, sanctuary scheme, the whole raft, obviously refuge, accommodation-based services as well. So we'll be sharing that. So thanks, Nicole, and thank you for your kind words. I still am blushing, and we're just really, really pleased that you could make it today, and good luck with everything that you've got on your plate this week as well. All right, so what we're going to do now is that we've got our Q&A panel. So there's, I mean, you're in for a real treat. So do you want to turn your cameras on? There we go. There they are. Okay, so I'm going to introduce each person as I see them. So you've got Fran Bolton from Homes for Haringey. It's lovely to see you, Fran. Judith Vickris, who is our National DAHA Development Manager, which a lot of you will know. Same goes for Saranya. Hi, Saranya. You're right. Who is our London DAHA Development Manager, covering London. And then Sharon, who is our Cambridgeshire DAHA Development Manager. It's lovely to see you too. We've got Karen from Guinness, who was massively involved in the interim evaluation, and obviously, yeah, so, and is looking very flash with her headset. We've already commented on that. And we've got Cantor from Bolton at Homes as well. It's lovely to see you. And then last but by no means least, we've got Karen from Southampton Council. So we wanted, when we were putting the panel together, to really think about having representation from local authorities and housing providers, but then also wanted you to have the opportunity to meet the team. I am going to embarrass, but Freya, it would be really lovely if you could turn your camera on as well quickly and say hi to everyone, although you're not part of the panel, because Freya is in the background doing all of the technological stuff, but is also just about to come another one of our DAHA National Development Managers, but also working with Morgan Sindel. So we're massively proud. And I don't know if Rebecca is on the panel, but just in case she is, I want her to turn. She's not. Okay, so big shout out to Rebecca and Caroline as well, who are watching from home. I just wanted to make sure you met the rest of the team as well. So without further ado, if you do have any questions, oh, I can see some coming in, so I will look at those. But I wanted to start with a fairly straightforward one to those that have kind of been through DAHA accreditation or got DAHA accreditation, so congratulations. And really want to hear from you, actually, as the people that have done this work, about, you know, after or starting to undertake DAHA accreditation, how soon did you start seeing improvements in the response, and what did that look like for you as an organisation? Obviously we've got your varying sizes as well, so that also would be quite interesting. And I'm going to start with Cantor, if I may. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry, thank you, Goody. The difference that we saw as soon as we started the DAHA process, because it meant that we were changing the mindset of the organisation as a whole. Whilst we do have a specialist domestic abuse team within Bolton Home who covers the victims, and we also support our employees, we started to see the difference as soon as we started to pull the strategy action plan together. And it meant that the whole organisation were changing the mindset, making sure that they were looking out for signs, all our frontline technical staff, as well as our frontline officers going out, reporting them back. And it kind of escalated the casework that our officers were going through. And I think the accreditation as well, now that we are accredited, has given Bolton at Home a sense of pride, sense of achievement, and we are privileged to have been gone through the process. And we feel, well, I certainly feel when I'm talking to our providers within Bolton, who we work very closely with, that we have a sense of pride that we have a coordinated approach to what we kind of see. We also kind of make sure that our victims are safe in their property. We have an in-house target hardening, and the cost element of it, well, that we take on board in-house at the moment, and we cover the cost of everything that we provide for the victims.
Thanks, Cantor, that's really helpful. I'm just going to pass over to Karen from Guinness.
We noticed quite early on the difference. We work with 130 different local authorities country, and we've got over 65,000 homes. So with 140,000 customers that use all of this. So it was a massive task. Our staff was, sort of all spread out. So it was a case of doing a lot of awareness sessions at the beginning, reaching out to staff, whether they were estates, whether they're customer liaison officers, whatever department they worked in, to them, having awareness sessions, getting their buy-in from the beginning. And I think that's really, really important, especially when you're a big organisation, and getting senior management from different parts of the organisation to buy in and become part of that steering group. And then deliver that message down to absolutely everyone. We encouraged watching videos. We encouraged sort of, people to get in contact with me and through. And I think one of the biggest things that I noticed the change in was I was never aware, and probably wouldn't have been, of any staff members that may domestic abuse. But the more we talked and the more we got involved, people were phoning me up and talking to me. When I did the training, we did the video on Bernard. The training was really, really important. That played a massive part in raising awareness. And some of my colleagues phoned me up, and they, I'm a survivor of domestic abuse, but I'm also a survivor of honour-based abuse. And everybody started talking. I think that's the key, is to get everybody talking about it right at the very beginning. And then as you go through the processes with DAHA, you get there and you get everybody involved.
Thanks, Karen. That's great. There's a couple of questions in training underneath, so I'll come back to them, so I can see your questions coming through, so thank you. But I just want to get Karen and Fran's perspective as well. So I'll hand over to Fran now from Homes for Haringey.
Thank you, Goody. I mean, just to echo practically a lot of the things that Karen and Cantor have said, I think that I'm really smiling because it makes me so happy how proud I am of staff at Homes for Haringey. The buy-in to this was pretty much straight away. We have, even though we do have a domestic abuse service within Homes for Haringey that will work with the residents and anyone who was approaching us to the frontline homelessness service. It was just amazing to see how passionate people became about keeping the conversation going, wanting to make sure that the right questions were asked. Training was such a big part of that as well. To echo what Karen said, it was really, really amazing to see actually members of staff coming forward to ask for support as well. So the work that we did directly with our employees was fantastic. We had heads of service sharing their personal experiences of domestic abuse on our social media platforms, which I felt were very powerful and very brave, which supported and encouraged staff members to come forward. And I commend anyone who does that. So it was just fabulous. Along straight to kind of the work that we did with our frontline repairs team, the buy-in and the support from them was absolutely fabulous. The work that the operatives were doing in homes and the things that they were highlighting and the support they were then kind of coordinating and getting in place for their residents, it really, really showed how important it was to them and how much they care, because obviously not only it's 100% the right thing to do, but you get that sense of, we have these shared experiences and they understand now, I think, that because obviously, from back in the day, from frontline homelessness service, it was probably a different thing. And we know that when people went and approached us homeless, it's so good to see, especially within Homes for Harrogate, that you have this immediate sense of understanding, sit down, let's listen, what can we do? How can we help you? And they have this real understanding that victims, survivors are experts of their own experience. And that's one of the key things. So sorry, Al, because I just get really excited when I'm asked questions about this. But if I would recommend any housing provider to go for DAHA, because it really, really makes a difference.
Oh, Fran, no one's going to tell you off for your passion. You're in a safe space.
Yeah,
I think we're all in the same boat. Thank you so much. That's really insightful. And I think lots of people are saying in the chat about the repairs and contractors and stuff. And Karen, so you actually manage the IDVA service as well, don't you? In terms of, so I thought it'd be really interesting in terms of your experience of how you found it. And it's lovely to see you, by the way.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Well, the experience we did find fairly straightforward and relatively easy to do, but and I echo everybody else. As soon as people get the passion for it, it's a win-win, really. I mean, it was an absolute no-brainer for us in the local authority. My IDVA team is housed within the local authority, and we share sort of our service. We're part of Adults in Housing. So with our local authority housing responsibilities and our local housing offices, we were managed by the same director. So it was really easy to persuade him to kind of go ahead with this. He'd been involved with domestic violence and abuse for a number of years. He used to chair some of our MARICs. But as soon as we started the journey, the buy-in was incredible, actually. And I have to say, for us, the differences we started noticing pretty much after the first audit. So all the housing managers started to complete audits of the cases that were known, and actually putting actions in and following it up, and kind of it made people feel like, right, okay, we have got to get this right. And from the IDVA's point of view, the difference it's made to victims is absolutely unbelievable, absolutely incredible. I mean, I talk about kind of the process of DAHA in terms of the local authority response to COVID, but I don't think we'd have managed it without our housing partners, very much partners, in having the eyes and ears on really, really vulnerable people. And we had kind of a real proper community coordinated response to some of the most the most vulnerable people, and that we would coordinate our actions as well. And that would not have been possible without DAHA. But what DAHA did, I think, for our local housing officers is gave them the confidence and all the training that was provided. We created domestic abuse champions. And we just spread that passion amongst our DA champions, and there's a network of them that really encourage good practice throughout. And it's been a fantastic process, and I'm so pleased that we did it. I can't, I will sell it to as many local authorities as I possibly can who have housing stock, because it's just a no-brainer, really, an absolute no-brainer. And it's at the end of the day, it's about kind of making sure that victims are properly safe and feel secure in their own homes. And I think DAHA together, kind of like with the IDVA team, we do that.
Thanks, Karen. Sorry, it's quite overwhelming sitting here listening to all of you. So thank you so much. There's a couple of things that have been put up in the chat, and because obviously people are contributing live, I'm going to go to some of them. So Natalie, who I know is from Peabody, because I know her well, is saying, apart from training, what did you find most effective in driving up standards of case management? I think that's a really good question. Also, Linda has asked about the expectations are within the credit for staff training across the business. Linda, that's all wrapped into our online toolkit, and we'd be happy to talk to you because it depends on how big your organisation is and what that looks like already. So we could pick that up outside of this. So I'm going to go with Natalie quickly to say, anyone want to answer that in terms of the panel? Oh, Sharon, you're on mute. Sharon.
I put it on because of the background noise. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll answer that question. So the first couple of accreditations that I did were the main areas of improvement were around case management. And so what we did was obviously did the case audit, looked at that, but it was a little more about going backwards. It was really helpful to do like an evaluation questionnaire before and then later, and just see where things had changed. So it's not rocket science. It was looking at things like unconscious bias, the training not just being about domestic abuse, but being very trauma informed. And working with other agencies, involving specialist agencies in coming in and helping to do some sort of reflective practice sessions so that people could really understand what it was like for the survivor going through that process. And then just kind of keep checking back and not thinking about it just being training, but it's on the job training, it's reflective practice and working with your specialist agencies.
Thanks, Sharon. Anyone else?
Sorry, Goody, I'm just
Okay.
answering some on the chat now.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to mute Judith because Karen put her hand up.
Physically put my hand up. No, I agree with Sharon. I think the process of auditing and reflecting between kind of where we were at when we kind of started and then kind of working through where we wanted to be was incredibly powerful. And giving that feedback as well to local housing officers was so important, because they could then start to see the difference, the journey. And, you know, and that's what, when our first kind of accreditation, we wanted to go ahead with it because we wanted to see how far we needed to go. And that in itself was incredibly valuable. And we continue to do all of the auditing and reflecting back to the local housing officers. Okay. So audits were incredibly valuable.
That's really great. And Candace put her hand up as well. You're all going now.
With regards to training, I think we've got ours on a 3-yearly rollout at the moment, and it's helped massively for our officers and the whole Bolton at home to be confident in, if they get any disclosures, to know where to refer them to, and to provide that confidence and that supportive element to be towards the victim or the person who is actually disclosing, whether it be a member of staff or whether it be a person living in one of our properties.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Oh, and Fran? You're still on mute.
Sorry, I know we're all going for it now, aren't we? No, just to echo everything that they were saying, just to follow on from what Candace said, I think that, as we said about the training element, but also making sure that those mechanisms within the housing service for referrals into specific services, and to make sure that that's really clear for officers from the outset, so that they're confident in being able to offer the right advice and support. We have, it'll probably be mentioned later on, we have 20 survivors champions across the organisation in different directorates who look at whether it's specific training elements. There as somebody the go-to person for kind of advice and signposting, and we have 2 people who will look at audits within their directorate of how they're managing the DA specific cases for them. So for example, the tenancy management cases are looked at kind of from an auditing perspective, and we have somebody who's outside who come in to audit, specific DA cases as well. So I think the DAHA process really taught us a lot, and we've benefited from it in regards to how we're ensuring that we're making sure things are being checked and reviewed regularly. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, everyone. I hope that answered your question, Natalie. Oh, Karen, you've got your hand up as well. Did you just put your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. Yeah, I did. Just to add to that, we did looking of our cases, and one of the things we did, apart from giving individual feedback and supporting colleagues to make some changes in the way they were working, I also put together a best practice guidelines to share with our caseworkers, so and that covered everything that DAHA wanted with regards to the standards, was in with that best practice guidelines, and also practice from colleagues, so that they'd a go-to sort of document to look and sort of trigger if sort of which agencies to kind of thing, and that was received really, really well, and also having that go-to person, which people knew that I was project and that they would pick up the phone and talk to me, and being accessible to them was amazing.
That's brilliant, Karen. I'm managing multiple mediums here, because I've also got, in terms of DAHA, we had some funding recently to enhance our training offer and develop our skills tools and everything, and that's all on the website. Also, for those of you that aren't familiar with DAHA, when you sign up, you get access to an online toolkit which is enhanced, where we've collected, we're kind of like a vacuum of like taking all the best practice and putting it on the online toolkit, so that you can use that within your own organisation. So I was just making sure, because we're making the assumption that people understand exactly where you would go, but on the website there is this toolkit, and there's loads of, and basically where we identify best practice, because there's so much out there, we're putting it in one place for all housing providers to be able to share that best practice. And the other thing as well, to shamelessly plug, because I can, is Judith has set up, and then obviously Saranya's running the one in London as well, regional groups across the country to learn from each other, and the details of them are all on our website as well, so please come along to those, because it's a great way of getting local specialist services and also survivors in local areas where they wanted to be involved, and also housing providers together and local authorities, which is a really great segue for me to ask. Also, Ruth, just in answer to your question about Chartered Institute of Housing, they're a key partner of ours, and I'm going to pick up that conversation with them, because that is a great suggestion on your behalf. So I will take that forward, Ruth. So thanks so much for that. And now we've got Deborah. Hi, Deborah. So it's lovely to see you, but I can't see you. She's asking, it would be good to hear from local authority providers, so Southampton and Homes for Haringey, who've achieved accreditation, whether and how they've worked with their housing options homelessness services, and what impact accreditation has had on those services. And I'm going to start with Karen, because it was an integral part, wasn't it? You're on mute.
Yes, it was. And although we were unsure whether, we felt more confident with doing kind of like our housings first, and then kind of eventually go to homeless and housing options. But it was you, Goody, that persuaded us to go all in one. Why not? Let's all go for it. And it was very, very good, actually. I think it bridged a lot of kind of just understandings and gaps between kind of the different services within housing. But also it brought the IDVAs a lot closer to homelessness, and kind of, so yeah, I mean, it was a really, really good idea. Well, there was some resistance, but it was a great idea. And I am just so glad we did it, really.
Thanks, Karen. And Fran, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so thank you. So similar pretty much to Karen, it was actually such a great experience with our frontline homelessness service. My service, Hearthstone, is an in-house domestic abuse service for Homes for Haringey anyway, and we come under the same directorate. So in a sense, it was quite great, a good vibe from the get-go, where we conduct joint assessments together where appropriate for victim survivors, so that that person isn't having to share their story and go from one place to another, kind of with their traumatic experience. It was about how we look at each case by case and look at what is the best situation for them. We had different tiers of training for different people within the homelessness service, so whether the frontline service, and I created management training as well, which is delivered to their service, but the others obviously in the organisation too. So I think that it's so beneficial to have that joint working with them, so that you can understand each other's teams better and make sure that you're providing the best service that you can for that victim survivor. So yeah.
That is absolutely brilliant. I think so, Deborah, I guess because you've also elaborated again, kind of, I'm wondering whether, and it's basically DAHA accreditation works for both. So it isn't just social housing providers. We also work on do both at the same time, as is the case with Homes for Haringey and Southampton, and others with they're just housing providers. But we have also just standalone done homelessness services like Southwark, and that was about working in partnership with Solace Women's Aid, who actually have got a co-located IDFA within the homelessness department at Southwark, and the difference that that makes then in terms they've even in terms of the Homeless Reduction Act, Deborah, they've got a personal housing plan that they have bespoked into just specifically for domestic abuse. So happy to take this conversation outside of this as well, because there's some brilliant best practice happening in homelessness services as well. But although there's also lots of work to be done as well, we're under no illusions, and we would want to make sure that we were getting all homelessness services. Sam, thanks for your feedback as well. That is absolutely lovely. And I'm just going to actually go back. Oh, thanks, Deborah, no problem. So in terms of some of the other questions that we were going to bring up, let me have a look. I guess as well, I really want to kind of bring it back to specialist services as well. And this is a question to all of you. You know, they are absolutely key in this. And we wanted to basically ask a question, you know, how do you ensure that specialist services are integral to the DAHA accreditation process? Anyone, put your hands up. Go on, Fran.
Sorry, hi. So we have, just to kind of, I'll be brief. So again, it's kind of part of our training package as well, and we regularly have specialist services coming into the organisation. Obviously, even now during COVID, we do it virtually, where they're talking about their service to make sure that we're aware of what's available in the borough. In Homes for in Haringey, we have obviously the BOG team within Haringey Council that will look at kind of they showcase as well the specialist services. We have integrated links with services like Sign Health, and that's especially, we've developed them even further through our homelessness service. So again, they have an officer that will come in and work with clients that may approach them that have the need for Sign Health, or that's just one example. But it is about making sure you're always having that conversation going, you're introducing the services in the borough and making sure that everybody's aware of the pathways. One example of how we did it was during the 16 Days of Activism, where we had various specialist services come in to give talks to our to the whole staff at Homes for Haringey, and again kind of reshare their links and how we work together, and they gave a lot of case studies as well. So yeah, that's just kind of one of the things that we do to ensure that that's embedded.
Thanks so much. And Kanta, I saw your hand raised.
I think it's extremely important to have specialist services on board and to be integral with what the housing provider does in providing a support service to the domestic abuse victims. In Bolton, we have a unique Bolton partnership where we have on board 15 providers. We've got Bolton Council, ourselves, mental health, all the specialist DAV services, and we have regular meetings to ensure that we're on top of what Bolton is experiencing, and we will kind of put forward strategic recommendations as well for everybody to take on board. We work very well with our refuge and our other specialist services, in that we have fortnightly meetings with them to talk about move-ons, and even to talk about, even with homelessness, they attend the meetings and we talk about move-ons for those who are in refuge or for those who are experiencing homelessness, and whether or not we as a provider can help out. So yeah, it is integral to make it work.
I'm also seeing, Ria, it's lovely to see you as well in terms of putting your best practice in the chat, because there's a lot of interest here about local authorities, and I just wanted to quickly interject that that's also really vital in terms of the new statutory duty that's coming into place at local authority level. And we've been having lots of conversations with local authorities nationally about how they could stretch that to look at whole housing, which DAHA is a part of. So like the plethora of housing options that, and if you're interested to hear more about that, because obviously all going to have local partnership boards. So how vital is it that housing is a central part of that? And that's not just about the local authority, it's also about how do you scoop up those housing providers, because in a lot of the DHRs that we've reviewed standing together, that the social housing providers had that information, they just weren't as linked into the multi-agent or the coordinated community response as much as they could have been. So just wanted to throw that out there as well, because there's a massive opportunity right now to be influencing at a local level. So that's great. I wanted to move on to another question. Thanks so much for your answers. That's so great. We're looking at the priority areas. There's 8 of them, and if you're not aware of them, just go on our website. But one of them is about inclusivity and accessibility. And I just wanted to ask, you know, how do you ensure that inclusivity and accessibility, the standard is demonstrated and evidenced? And that is to the DAHA team as well. I know we like, if you want to chip in, go for it. Go on, Saranya, and then I'll come to you, Karen.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sure Karen and Fran also got kind of really good answers for this, but kind of with the key thing is we'll be looking at your case audits. I obviously operate in London, so as a mapping exercise, I tend to ask providers, please can you tell me the demographics of your particular area? If you're telling me that kind of half your borough is BME, but I'm only seeing cases from white women, then that tells me that's a problem. So that's the key thing, kind of looking at case audits. Part of the interviews as well, we always ask kind of what services are you linked in with, and you'll have your kind of local ones, which is brilliant, but the providers that really go above and beyond are the ones that say, you know what, we're linked in with this particular service. So for example, Gallup for LGBT people, I know Hackney, for example, they're linked in with Sister Space, which is a provider for Black women, and that's what we want to see there. And just and also there's kind of biases as well that we might have. I will say my London providers are pretty good at that element in terms of inclusivity and accessibility, but mainly we look at kind of case audits, but also our staff kind of what is there. And really good providers as well, they'll have kind of a directorate of different services, and that will be normally a very inclusive one. Another thing that we do as well, we are really keen to interview specialist services as part of the accreditation process, because we want to hear from them. What is it like? What's the partnership working like? So for example, I had a provider that worked with the Asian Women's Resource Centre, and kind of from that interview I could really hear that and see that actually the response had really improved, and the person that I spoke to was saying, you know, this particular local authority, I can see the referrals coming, I can see better partnership working, this is really positive, where there might have been gaps before, but this is different. So that's what we do, and we are keen to interview the specialist services as well. But I don't know if anyone else wants to chip in.
Thanks, Saranya. Karen?
Yeah, when we was doing the DAHA accreditation, due to the size of our organisation, it was really, really important that you know, we tapped into specialties. We obviously have lots and lots of local services that our different members of staff were using, but what we did was put together a list of local services, a list of national services, such as Southwold Black Sisters, Karma Nirvana. I contacted different agents. I you know, had conversations with them, you know, what can you do for our customers? We have a list of agency. LGBT Foundation is an organisation that we work very, very closely with, looking at refuge for people with disabilities, and making sure that everybody knew, keeping our list accessible not only on our internal website but on our external website, so that customers knew where to go, and also promoting the use of Bright Sky, which, you know, so that customers could see different agencies there. And when we're dealing with cases, you know, looking outside the box, you know, do we need to look at specialist agencies rather than a local one that can perhaps give more support to people? So that was something we did. We put posters up, and the posters weren't just for, say, Women's Aid, national sort of number for domestic abuse. We put posters in different areas for Gallup, Men's Advice Line, as well as the more central ones, to make sure. And, you know, throughout our training, when we did our awareness sessions, every sort of contact sort of talking about different groups of people and how they can be affected by domestic abuse and where they need to go to get that specialist help and support.
Thanks, Karen. Anyone else before I move on to another questions in some of the chat? Cool, okay. So Stephanie has put a number of questions in the chat, which are really comprehensive. So I don't think we'll probably get to all of them, Stephanie, but I think they're brilliant. So I kind of want to. But talked about kind of particular models of strength around supporting people with multiple issues going on. For example, substance misuse, mental ill health, also with perpetrators moving. I'll go on to that. That's a whole different thing. I just wanted to say, Stephanie, we've got a Housing First project that we run in partnership with Solace Women's Aid, and we've got a number of housing providers that are giving us units to make that project run in Westminster, and they include Peabody, Southern, L&Q, Women's Pioneer and Octavia. And I would love to see all housing providers nationally doing that. If they all gave 3 or 5 units to those with multiple disadvantages across the country, we would have a chance at ending that rough sleeping, multiple disadvantage, not being able to access refuge, not because refuge, but because of resources. So if you haven't heard about that, Stephanie, we will, it's basically, it's on our website and stuff. Does anyone else have anything they wanted to add to that? We also had a really interesting meeting a minute ago about having MARAC reps specifically for with multiple disadvantage, because they often don't reach that. So yeah, so I wanted to say that. Anyone else got anything to say?
No, just to say that from the regional groups, over the last few weeks, there has been as an exponential increase really in referrals to refuge, but can't get into refuge because of the complex needs. And I think what people are seeing is as an outcome or an impact of COVID and the lockdown, they're seeing people with much more higher levels of complex needs. And so exactly that came up yesterday about the accommodation and being able to find people with complex needs and, you know, sort of difficulties in society generally. Trying to find them accommodation is incredibly difficult. And we did talk about just the idea of some housing providers being able to give up 2, 3, 4 units each would be just amazing if you think how many housing providers we've got. And, you know, yeah, that seems to be a huge issue more than ever at the moment.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. And then the perpetrator housing question. I know what I want to say to this, but I don't want to hold the space, so I'm trying to sit back. Anyone want to, in terms of housing perpetrator, there's been small pilots, Stephanie, but nothing expansive. And we've got the National Housing Policy and Practice Group that I chair, and we've also got a perpetrator subgroup to that. So there's lots of work around that. But I guess the only caveat is that it has to be done safely. Yeah. And I have had concerns with, you know, some housing providers not understanding the perpetrator and how specialist that is, saying, oh, we can do that. Yeah. And not talking. Go on, Cantor. Was the start, and then off.
We have 2 officers that solely work with perpetrators. What they will do is link in with the victim's officer or those who are supporting the victim, and when it is safe to do so, they will assess what the issues are and what the root causes are, and from there on they will either make a referral into support, or we would enforce if we could. So those are the pathways that we would take, but obviously, yeah, we would make sure that it was safe for us to do that before we would do anything.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Cantor. Anyone else? Karen Marsh.
Sorry, it's confusing, isn't it? And we're just developing actually, and kind of well ready to go next week as part of the IDFA team. Is a male engagement worker role, and the purpose of the male engagement worker absolutely is to start to talk to alleged perpetrators, particularly if they've got children, about how we can help them become the best father or parent that they can be, which is kind of, it's quite an innovative model. We're building it on the Safe and Together model from America, but it is about, you know, we are supporting multiple victims and survivors kind of on a regular basis, but we recognise that the perpetrator just, you know, remains invisible. So with a number of different departments, we are beginning to pull it all together to start to have those conversations with perpetrators. But the whole point of it is to nudge them to an accredited perpetrator programme. But often what we're finding is perpetrators won't just pop along to an accredited perpetrator programme. They need that kind of encouragement and that kind of gentle pushing, nudging. We like to go, you know, might nudge them a bit hard occasionally, but it is about actually them recognising the importance of kind of their behaviour and the impact of their behaviour on the whole family unit, and actually what can we do to help them. So that is quite a new model that we're launching next week, actually. So we're very pleased with it. That's
really interesting. I didn't know. Cantor, were you going to?
Yes. Can I just also add, as part of best practice and following on what Karen said, any new tenants that are coming in who we know have perpetrated, we do a robust risk management with them and make sure that they are allocated a property which is appropriate and that they link in with our support and enforcement officers for DAV. So yeah, we do a lot of sifting as well prior to housing any perpetrator.
Thank you so much, Judith. I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, a little hand. I was just going to add really that in terms of our priority area and the standards around perpetrator management, what we're looking for is that overarching responsibility of an organisation to hold perpetrators to account for the behaviour, whatever that may look like. So that might look like being proactive on enforcement, but it also might look like making sure that every action you take shows that a survivor that it's not their fault and that you will support them, and you're showing a perpetrator that the abuse is on them. However, you can house them, you can work with them to engage in the beginning of the support. So it's part of the coordinated community response really to perpetrators and how important that is. The basis of the CCR is to hold a perpetrator to account for the abuse. So if we're doing that in every aspect of the narrative that we have as an organisation, that's going to go a huge way to changing the narrative much wider. And I think because there was a couple of questions on this, and Charlie from Wolverhampton particularly, and I think it is the question of, you know, because there's a lot of pressure on housing providers and maybe local authorities to, particularly at Marrax, to just move a victim, a survivor, but we need to keep challenging, we need to keep putting the question back out to those other agencies saying, well, what are you doing about the perpetrator? She wants to stay safe in her own home. We as a CCR can enable her to do that. What are you doing about the perpetrator, those organisations who can? And if we keep putting that challenge back and keep raising those barriers to that quick answer of moving a victim, a survivor, then we're going to have a much wider impact than just what we're doing right now.
Thanks so much, Judith. That's really great. I just saw Joyce put something in terms of just got me thinking about how do we get more people allocating units. Actually, it goes right back to the planning stage and and I think that's a really good point. Thank you, Joyce. And we should get onto that with our providers that we're talking to. So thank you so much for raising that in the chat. The other question that we had from somebody prior to the event as well is there any data that shows that any housing association or a local authority as part of DAHA have seen a reduction in the amount of DHRs they're involved in? Anyone want to answer that? Judith put hand up.
Well, just it would be difficult, I think, really, in the same way that people ask the same question about Marrax, has it prevented homicide? You know, we can't really tell, but what we do know is that there is a lot of domestic homicide reviews that have highlighted the issue around housing and the ability that's been missed, of the opportunity that's been missed to identify domestic abuse early. So I think one of the sort of key things about DAHA and one of our visions is that we help housing providers, and housing providers can identify domestic abuse early and intervene, provide the right interventions at an earlier opportunity to prevent domestic abuse escalating to that high risk or indeed to the serious harm or homicide. So there's been, you know, we talk in the webinars quite a lot about domestic homicide reviews, and one in particular where we talk about the domestic abuse being seen as antisocial behaviour and the lack of information sharing between organisations because they hadn't involved housing and they hadn't involved, I think the DHR actually, we would say wrongly, concluded that if we invited antisocial behaviour teams to be part of the domestic or MARACs or whatever, it isn't that at all. It's about housing providers and local authorities ensuring that domestic abuse is daily business for everybody and having that lens, and that it's not hidden in antisocial behaviour. And that seems to be the key theme through domestic homicide reviews, is that there were antisocial behaviour complaints, but nobody really identified it as domestic abuse, and there were opportunities missed. And I think we also know that you know, Standing Together did a fantastic piece of work looking at domestic homicides in London, supported by London councils to do that. And MOPAC, wasn't it? Supported by MOPAC to do that. And that conclude that most definitely had identifying opportunities for housing to intervene and spot domestic abuse and intervene in the right way and provide the right response every time. And it's just, I think it just highlights everything that this does, is highlight the importance of housing in that coordinated community response. Whereas I think, you know, I've worked in the sector for 20 odd years, and I think housing were pretty much not invited to the tables, but also didn't push themselves to the tables. And I think that's what's changed and is changing, what accreditation really does push in the right direction.
Thanks, Judith. We've got 2 minutes left. I wanted to do some closing remarks just and then let everyone go. It's unbelievable. We've still got 152 people on because people have stayed to the very end. So really appreciate all of your support. For the panel members, for you, you know, Karen, Cantor Karen and Fran, for giving up your time today, and obviously Joe and Nicholas and Sarah before, and it's just been an incredible event. And thank you so much for all of the work that you do and continue to do for survivors and children all over the country. And we really look forward to hearing from those of you that are on the call. You know, please reach out to us, please join the regional groups, please look at the whole housing and the context of DAHA, start talking about this within your own organisations, and you'll be amazed at kind of what it opens up for everyone. So thank you so much, and we hope you have a lovely afternoon. And I guess it's just to say goodbye, really.